Let's talk a little bit here about the Old Testament. One question that a lot of people tend to have when it comes to the Old Testament is, well, something like the book of Genesis. Is this
Right.
real history? Is it mythology? Is it a combination of both? Where do we land on this as Catholics?
Sure. Well, is it history is a broad question. Um, not everything in the book of Genesis is of a historical genre. I mean, we've
Mm,
got poetry in there, and especially the first 11 chapters.
mm,
I would they're not history writing in our modern sense. It's more I would regard it more as kind of worldview building narratives. We don't have like a very succinct term for that, but what we find in the first 11 chapters is we build an entire view of the world in deft, succinct strokes. Like, this is the framework to think about reality. um, but I'm not trying to be evasive either.
mhm.
I think we can phrase it this way: does Genesis contain historical information? Absolutely. Does Genesis relate to real persons in space time who we are related to, etc.? Yes, absolutely. And especially from chapter 12 on, can we place the events of Genesis into known historical contexts? And yes, absolutely. There's several places where we can make uh, synchronisms
Mm.
with what we know of ancient Near Eastern history. So yes, generally speaking, yes, Genesis contains a great deal of historical information. Although most of it is a biography, I
Yeah.
would say, like in terms of genre. Genesis 12 to the end of the book is a kind of a cultural biography of cultural ancestors. But these are real people living in the present day land of Israel and the land of Egypt and etc. And yes, these are space time individuals who really ate and breathed and lived and interacted, etc.
One story that I heard you tell recently in another interview is where you went to the Society for Biblical Literature, and they had a session that was talking about the historicity of Sodom and Gomorrah. Can you maybe walk us through that? Tell us a little bit about
Right. Yeah. A number of years ago now, I'd have to look and locate the exact year. Somewhere between 2012 and 2016, I was at one of the Society of Biblical Literature conventions that was being held that year in San Francisco. And I wandered into a session because I was a little bit bored, actually. I was looking for something interesting. I had this archaeology session. I'm always interested in archaeology. So going to this archaeology session, I sit down, I'm listening. After about 45 minutes, I realize that the presenters think that they have found Sodom and Gomorrah,
it.
okay, biblical Sodom and Gomorrah. So really starting to pique my interest. So after the session was over and they opened up for Q&A, I was the first one to raise my hand. And I asked the presenter, who I later found out was an archaeologist by the name of Steve Collins. I asked him, so did you find any arrowheads? And the reason I asked that is because when you're dealing with biblical archaeology or any ancient Near Eastern archaeology, you have these things called destruction layers where these cities are destroyed, because most cities have a lifespan and they end up getting destroyed at some point by somebody or something. And if it's destroyed in battle, then you get arrowheads from the attacking army. So that's a telltale sign that your city was wiped out by human warfare. If you don't find arrowheads, then you got some kind of natural disaster going on. So again, I asked, well, did you find any arrowheads? And he knew what I was getting at. And he responded by saying, well, I didn't really want to go there on the record. But all I'm going to say right now is that it appears to have been destroyed in a heat event. like there's like 20 other people and myself, in this kind of sleepy session that wasn't widely advertised. And we're like looking at each other like, what's he talking about? What's a heat event? Is that like a wardrobe malfunction? What kind of euphemism is this? So okay, so he ended the session. They stopped all the recording devices and stuff like that. And so we all rushed him at the front of the room. We're like, okay, cut the crap and just tell us what you found. And so Dr. Collins started to explain, it's like, okay, we got down to the destruction layer of these mounds, which we were coming to believe were Sodom and Gomorrah. And we pulled out this piece of pottery, and on one side it was glazed. And he said, my heart sank because when I saw that glazing, I thought, oh, our site is contaminated. And the reason for that is that pottery glazing of this sort uh, didn't become common in the Near East until the Ottoman period, which is like AD 1000. So thousands of years later.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're talking about a Bronze Age excavation, right? So it's hard to say we saw this glazing, but then he turned the pottery shard over, and on the other side it was clearly late Bronze Age pottery, but it's got this glazing which is anachronistic. So long story short, he sent it to labs. I think it was Los Alamos actually that he sent it to, but could be wrong on that. But he sent it to some labs in the U.S. and the lab report comes back and they say, well, this glazing that you've got on your pottery is trinitite. It's like, okay, well, what's trinitite? Well, trinitite is this kind of crystalline glass that you get when you set off an atomic bomb in the desert and it melts the glass underneath your explosion. It's created when you raise silica-containing sand to a temperature of over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, for at least a brief amount of time. So again, the report comes back and says your pottery has been exposed to temperatures above 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit for at least a couple of seconds, but not very long, because it began to drip. It melted the pottery into glass and it began to drip, but then it cooled quickly. So a brief, couple of seconds impact of, more than 4,000 degrees. So, okay. Long story short, they found a lot of evidence, a lot of this glazing on the surface. They found human remains where, the skeleton was intact up until about halfway up the spine, and then just a scorch mark because apparently the person was standing behind a wall. So the impact of the heat for the lower part was blocked by the wall. The upper part of the person was vaporized, by this blast from, I believe it was about like 27 degrees above the horizon. So there are different theories. Some kind of meteor is what a lot of people propose, similar to what happened in Tunguska, Siberia, where the whole, back in the, I believe it was the 19th century, that like several hundred square miles of taiga or Siberian forest was blasted flat from what they believe was an incoming meteor. So this is absolutely astounding. So essentially, though, we have a reconstruction here that basically fits the biblical narrative in Genesis 19. Fire from the sky, destroying the largest cities in the region at this time, and Abraham was an eyewitness of this event. Absolutely sensational, of course, and astounding. Collins has gone on to write books about this. You can get on Amazon, type in Stephen Collins, Sodom and Gomorrah, and his work will pop up.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and if you want to support the channel, visit patreon.com/Reason and Theology.